Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4for4 Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined today by a very special friend in life, someone you may know because he's been 69%, 71%, and 68% against college props the past 3 years. Maybe you know him as NBC's lead college fantasy football analyst, but also I know him as just wrestling brethren. It is none other than NBC's own Eric Froton. Froton, how's it going, buddy?
It's great, John. Thank you very much for being on here. Obviously, I'm very excited. We got to hang out and talk about this at the Combine last week in Indianapolis, where you were practically the mayor of that event, Mr. Daigle, getting out there, pressing the flesh, and learning everything we need you to know so that your listeners can be well informed, my friend.
Not only was it fun to meet with you, but it was fun seeing Chris Allen and Sam Hoppin's face as everyone we passed, I shook their hands because little does everyone realize I've overlapped with so many people in the industry. Sean McVay's best friend, Andy Benoit, for instance. I used to work with him and Robert Mays and Robert Klimko. So being in prime at 6 a.m, which is a whole nother podcast for another day between us, but being there and then turning around and shaking coaches' hands because I have experience working with them, I think that was the most eye-opening thing for everyone, that this little fantasy plebe happened to overlap with so many coaches and you, of course, in the past.
Oh, yeah. And me, of course, at NBC Sports, where you and I have done a couple of on-air podcasts together. This is the first one that we've kind of got to, take the gloves off here, unencumbered. That you and I, we can be let loose. So I'm pretty excited about that. Obviously, Mr. Daigle.
And make no mistake, Eric, you were here not only because you're my friend, but I genuinely, truly believe you are one of the very best at what you do. Everyone knows the godfathers of dynasty leagues and college football analysis, but I put your work genuinely amongst the best. And that's why I'm so excited you took the time to join us here. And I want to start with an easy layup for you because a topic coming out of the Combine, and we'll get into the gems, the hidden gems, deeper dive along the way here. But let's start with a layup in Jordan Addison, because Addison actually moved up 2 spots and Daniel Jeremiah's top 50 board to number 9 overall, and his highest ranked wide receiver in those top 50 rankings, following what most considered to be a poor performance in athletics testing at the Combine. But beyond his 18th percentile speed score at 173 pounds, you and I both know that Addison hit the ground running as an 18-year-old, leading Pitt in catches and receiving yards in his first year on campus. So basically, does his testing worry you at all? Or are you still just as high on Addison coming out of the Combine?
Sure, we'd like to see a little more than the 4.49, which is where he ended up at. I believe his initial line was 4.4, and that ticked up to 4.43, which was even, an underestimation at that. In fact, not to ding just Addison, but if you look, a lot of the wide receivers we expected to test a lot quicker in terms of where they were initially lined. Jalen Hyatt was initially lined at 4.3. He ended up at 4.41. That's a full 100th out. It shouldn't be a full 10th. Is that a full 10th? Yeah. And, so it wasn't just him. That being said, 5'11", 173, and in addition to a 4.49, 34-inch vert. I mean, I'd like to see a little more than the 34 inches. You want to see him at least in the high 30s, a 10.2 broad. So those are sort of metrics you look at for the cutting, stopping, the ramping down as opposed to the ramping up. But with Addison, you got to remember, as you mentioned, early breakout, true freshman breakout, pretty much it was Addison who was sort of like the Kenny Pickett whisperer over there at Pitt, because you got to remember the first 3 years of Kenny Pickett's career, he started 4 years. His first 3 seasons, he threw exactly, and it's a great anomaly, exactly 13 passes every season up until his final year, where Kenny Pickett comes alive happened as a senior, and frankly, a lot of that has to do with Jordan Addison. He was just locked onto him the entire time. It didn't matter how defenses tilted coverages to him over there at Pitt. Crafty, does a great job setting up his breaks. In terms of his ability to, make catches. You see him go across the middle and be able to take the shots. But, I just think with wide receivers, it really has become an art form. And we know that in recent years, such as, the prototype really is Devontae Smith, who was that 172 to 175 range with those freakishly long arms, of course, that is gives him a advantage in the contested catch scenarios. But I just think all the wide receivers are starting to get lighter and lighter and lighter at the NFL. At least with this class, the top guys seem to be on the lighter side. And I think that Addison sort of is a product of that. He can separate. He does a good job, manipulating defenders, but there's no way around it. When he's got a 5.2, 58th percentile RAS, relative athletic score, that is something that is a concern and that needs to be addressed. So I have bumped Jordan Addison down to my wide receiver 4 after the combine because of the lackluster results.
And wide receiver 4, still obviously respectable, but it's something everyone's discussing coming out of the combine. Something else that everyone's discussing coming out of the combine is bizarro Jordan Addison and Quentin Johnston. 10th in yards per route run in the FBS last year in his final year with Max Duggan, and 11th overall with 8.9 yards after the catch per reception at 6'3", 208. That's the kicker. But post-combine, Johnson has now dropped 10 spots on Mel Kiper's big board and down to number 29 overall on Daniel Jeremiah's top 50 rankings. Johnson, of course, didn't test much for us at the combine, Froton. So what are your thoughts on Johnson coming out of that event?
It's interesting with him in that we all wanted to see the 40-yard dash out of Quentin Johnston. Again, another guy whose initial line was 4.38. Shot immediately up to 4.44, where it kind of stayed. And even that, I heard rumblings, from different camps around the combine that Quentin Johnston has been comfortably in the 4.5s to 4.55 range when it comes to his 40 time, which, if you look at Drake London last year, Drake London didn't even run a 40-yard dash at all because he was coming off an injury. He probably would have been around the 4.6 range. But he's getting targets. We have so much tape on Drake London to see that he can take those extended handoff type things. If you're going to play 7 yards off him as a cornerback, he's going to catch that ball, and then he's going to face plant you into the dirt one-on-one against a 5'10", 180-pound cornerback. Like, you weren't doing that against Drake London. He was a legitimate power forward, college football, aggressive. He is coming for you if he gets that ball in his hand. It doesn't matter. He catches the ball, quickly turns, and you have a decision to make. How are you going to attack this guy? And it's a 10-yard pass every time out there. So that isn't kind of Quentin Johnston's game. But even though he didn't do the 40, I can't say he didn't have a good combine because he jumped 11.02. For his broad. That's a 99th percentile score for somebody who's 6'3", 208, which is where it wasn't the 6'4", 215 we all wanted, but he's 6'3", 208. And then a 40.5-inch vertical. So, those elite testing numbers, which are, again, that was a 97th percentile score for his size. So you can't say that he had a bad combine. And then you go and you watch the wide receiver drills, and he showed the ability to catch the ball outside his frame, which is something that I really, when it comes to with the pads on, I had some issues with that on his tape, because when he's going up and he's attacking that ball downfield, you see that a lot of the catch he's making, he's got to catch it right in line with his eyes. He isn't extending up, out, over as much. He's got to be right here. And, it causes him to lose some of those contested catch scenarios. It also, you'll see him, instead of going up and attacking at its highest point, he has a tendency to kind of let the ball come into his body a little bit when he's sort of like fading. So just these little things that he does that aren't quite alpha traits when you're downfield trying to win, I don't see him do. So when it comes to, I think that the overall speed dynamic is an issue with him. And I think that's what people are saying is like, okay, you're there with all the best. You're all in the same spot at the same time. And he's not running the 40-yard dash. I feel like that, like in Mel Kiper's example, that's bringing out some of the questions that we all have about him that he didn't answer when he had the opportunity to do so. So I think it's just a natural result is, that there's going to be sort of a tick down. But you have to remember, he did put up great testing numbers on the jumps. So, I don't think it was a complete catastrophe or anything. I do think that Jordan Addison did have a, less excitable, obviously, testing at the combine, but there were some things that, in terms of the way we watched him catch passes, stuff like that, that I do think had some positive aspects. So I have him at wide receiver 4 post combine. He was wide receiver 3 pre combine. So I did tick him down as well.
We will get back into wide receiver and dive deeper in a bit. But right now, I want to play devil's advocate and try to sneak in someone else into the RB2 discussion out of this class with you. Because right now, consensus is Jahmyr Gibbs or Zach Charbonnet, but I think it's a little more wide open than people think, or at least let's pretend that way. And I want to start with someone who you have ranked much higher than consensus, and that is Ole Miss's Zach Evans. So please, the floor is yours to explain why you love Zach Evans.
Well, with Zach Evans, first off, let's talk about the combine. He didn't do drills, but he came in at 202 pounds. That is a problem for the pre-combine Zach Evans ranking. He is going to take a tumble there because he was billed. The thing is about Evans, he was billed anywhere between 200 and 215, depending. Most of the time he was in that 215 range on team pages, and we had a couple. He had TCU and then Ole Miss. So I was kind of looking at him when I was initially ranked him. I'm looking at 210 to 215, which 210 is where I want you to be if you want to be considered as an every down, not coming off the field type running back in the NFL, because it's tough to take that pounding. We heard a lot about that particular narrative when it comes to Jahmyr Gibbs, who is, straight 5'9", 199. Can he handle the in between the tackles work? With Zach Evans, on a per carry basis, he was the most explosive running back in the entire NCAA last year. More 10-plus yard runs as a percentage of his carries than any other running back in the country. So just wildly productive, even though Quinshon Judkins, who's a sensational freshman, class of 2025, who will be a top 5 running back from that class. He's easily top 3 right now. He went and took control of that running back room at Ole Miss, despite the fact that Zach Evans, he was doing a great job every time he touched the ball. He's fluid. He has sort of his running style is more like a weaving type style, as opposed to the drastic, over-exaggerated type cuts that you'll see from like an Eric Gray. He's very exaggerated cuts out of him, not the short, tight, compact ones. You see that kind of out of Zach Evans, and his ability just to read the blocking and go with it, and he'll finish a run or two, there too. But look, is he going to be able to lower the shoulder at 202 pounds at the next level? The way he finishes runs? I think that's a real question. He's a running back who at TCU couldn't hold off Kendre Miller, who is a top 10 running back in this class as well, had to transfer to Ole Miss, and then, wasn't the pure feature primary back because of Judkins as discussed. So that is a problem. Somebody who didn't establish alpha status in 2 different running back rooms, despite the fact that one of them is an SEC room, and he was very successful on a per carry basis in the SEC. So there are a lot of conflicting things. The fact that he's 202 does concern me. I have to tick him down. My post ranks, I believe I have him as RB8 at the current moment. So that kind of tells you how I feel about taking him from, RB 3-4 range. I think I have him down in RB 7, and I have him behind Kendre Miller because he couldn't beat him out at TCU, and he's not going to be weighing in at the 215 that Miller is.
Well, let's discuss Kendre Miller going there, because as you said, you moved Miller up post-combine. What did you see in Miller's testing on tape that makes you higher on him now?
Well, just he weighed in where he said he'd be. My gosh, it's like a lot of the combine is like, who is a liar and who isn't? Who is being actually pseudo-truthful about, their height, their weight, their what's their 40 time? My gosh, all the optimistic 40 times that we got to experience at the combine, stuff like that. And, Miller didn't run. It wasn't that he tested particularly well, but he did weigh in, and he weighed in at 5'11", 215, which is right where you want to be. And when on tape, you see his running style, very aggressive. It really deploys that stiff arm, as a weapon to ward off tacklers. Isn't going to be, if there's anything like, the pass catching acumen. We didn't see him used in the receiving game hardly at all over there at TCU, even when Sonny Dykes came in this past year, who is an air raid disciple, coming from SMU, coming from Cal, where Davis Webb threw 4,000 yards. We haven't seen Cal throw the ball even remotely the same way since Dykes left. So where he wasn't used in a receiving fashion at a air raid adjacent spread school, that's certainly something to take a look at with Miller. But, just looking at him as that between the tackles, A, B gap ball carrier, he has the physicality. He has now the confirmed size, because look, just because he said he was 215, who knows? That's been verified. And I think that if you're looking at him at a consistent 2-down role with the potential to at least slide in there on third downs and catch a couple of passes, if he can develop that part of his game, I think that he is one of the better 250, one of the only backs that is 215, 220-ish, that you can really project athleticism-wise, and what I saw on tape, to being a real factor in the backfield on a 2-down basis. A lot of the guys up top, like the A-Chains, like the Jahmyr Gibbses, Tajay Spears, just for a few that are up there, are 205 to 195, in the A-Chain's case, 188.
Kendre Miller, of course, in a 60-40, 70-30 timeshare with DeMarcado in his final year at TCU. And that resembles the timeshare 70-30 share that Roschon Johnson was in behind Bijan at Texas. Johnson being the afterthought here, since it's Bijan. All you have to do is mention his first name and everyone gets perked up and excited. So what do you think about Roschon Johnson coming out this year?
Sure. Well, Roschon Johnson actually came out of high school as a quarterback. So Tom Herman, who's the former coach at Texas, kind of did this a couple of times, and it really worked out well for him, where he'd say, look, we're Texas. We want you. We'll give you, kind of the shot to play quarterback. But, we do think there's a path for you in the running back room if that doesn't pan out. Well, it didn't pan out throwing the ball with Roschon Johnson. And obviously, getting a full bell cow amount of work is not going to happen with Bijan Robinson as the number one. But the clear number two, and anytime anyone else got any extra work, it was going to be Roschon Johnson. And the amazing thing is, at 6 foot, 220 pounds, he actually broke more tackles on a per carry basis than Bijan Robinson did. He led all of the country in terms of broken tackle rate, even though he wasn't able to do it, obviously, on a 200 carry basis still. And the opportunities that he was afforded at Texas, he excelled with those limited touches. He can catch the ball. Obviously, is a great athlete all around. He ran a 4.58 at 220. I have no problem with that. Look, if you're under 4.6 at that range, and you've showed the ability to be elusive and to force missed tackles like Roschon Johnson has, well, good. All right. Well, I want to see what he can do, of course. Tested, weighed in at the 220 range that we want to see. And I think he is going to be considered as a fourth roundish type back for a nice goal line, short yardage, first and second down option for a team that is lucky enough to draft him.
I'm not trying to squeeze this next player into the RB2 discussion, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on Deuce Vaughn, because anyone listening to this podcast trying to catch up on prospects, if they were to hear there's this player available who registered 619 touches for 34 all-purpose touchdowns over his last 2 years in a Power 5 conference, they would say, okay, that player's very special and going to get drafted high. The issue, of course, is that Vaughn checked in at 5'5", 179 pounds at the combine. So your thoughts on Vaughn coming out into the NFL? What will he be viewed as? And is there hope here in potentially getting him in the last round of both Dynasty and best ball leagues?
With Deuce, you got to remember, again, as you said, 5'5". That's a legit 5'5". Yeah. Now, with him coming out of high school, so you got to remember, I'm a college fantasy guy, and I scout all these guys when they're coming out of high school because I'm projecting player performance at the collegiate level, both from a player props perspective, as well as obviously college fantasy. And when it comes to Deuce Vaughn, I selected him in the 5th round in the 2019 College Football Winning Edge 20-team Dynasty league.
It's a deep one.
Oh, it's 20 teams, 50-player rosters plus injured reserve. So you have up to 7 injured reserve players. So there's at any time 1,100 players owned in this particular player universe. So you have our supplemental drafts, which is all the players coming from their senior year in high school to be freshmen. I took him as a 5th rounder because at Kansas State, where he went, first off, Deuce Vaughn's dad is a scout, a longtime scout, like a lunch pail guy around the college and NFL level, like for 25 years. So he's a very well-known guy, very well-traveled. And the thing with Deuce Vaughn when he was coming into college, very, very first spring, he comes in, he's in their spring right out of the gate, and he knew all the plays. He knew exactly where to be. He knew exactly from a cerebral football perspective, exactly what he needed to do, exactly what his assignments were on every single play. And they said they'd never seen anybody come in with his level of preparation before in like the coaching staff, Chris Kleeman, head coach, and et cetera. They've never seen somebody come in the way that Deuce Vaughn was prepared. He was immediately, as a 5'5" freshman who was like 170 pounds at the time, he took that starting job away in short order and proceeded to be one of the most dynamic runners in the Big 12 for the last 4 years. All-purpose back. He's going to no problem catching balls out of the backfield. In fact, he's certifiably dynamic when you get the ball in his hands. If you look at some of his highlights, you'll see when he gets it in space, he is extremely shifty and very difficult to get a beat on, and really could have value in that satellite back role at the NFL level. I think, the best case scenario is you want to see a Darren Sproles type career. Sproles did have those giant thighs. A lot of people just sort of bounce off of him. He was a real unique kind of a build type of thing. I kind of see Mayan Williams next year, who's like 5'9", 220. He has that kind of a Sproles build, but even thicker. But, Vaughn isn't, at 180 pounds at 5'5", look, he's a little bowling ball. He's not small. He's not thin. He's not 160 pounds. He's 180 at 5'5", but it's going to be tough to see him projected to an every down role. A super Eckler would be great. It'd be like a little version of that, wherever he can go and be used, but you're going to need a team to really use him properly. So 5th round of the rookie drafts, I certainly don't have a problem with that. If you're looking for a satellite back in a PPR format that could, squeeze out 10 to 15 points a game. But if you're not in a full PPR, I don't think you're going to be able to glean the value off of Deuce Vaughn the way you would if it's maybe half or if it's a performance-oriented league, due to the fact that he isn't going to have the same kind of opportunities in the middle.
And before we close out running backs from the combine, you don't get enough credit, and I've told you this before, in my opinion, for predicting Elijah Mitchell's draft capital. Absolutely no one was discussing Elijah Mitchell 2 years ago. And then all of a sudden, you continue touting him as a terrific last-round selection, late-round selection, and he gets drafted in the 6th round by the 49ers in 2021. And so something I've been waiting to ask you, waiting specifically for this podcast, is there anyone else at running back you think those drafting in dynasty leagues, throwing darts in best ball leagues should draft because you are projecting that player or players to have draft capital come April?
There's a player that I've been watching a lot of these 5 round, as many of these 4 or 5 round rookie drafts I possibly can to make sure I have a beat on where these guys are going. From a running back perspective, a guy that I barely see him getting drafted. And I think he deserves to be in that 4th, 5th round range based on what he's put on tape. He didn't test, but I like Chris Rodriguez from Kentucky. Reason being, he's in that 220-pound range, 6 foot, 220. If you saw him at Kentucky over the past couple of years, he was the undeniable bell cow. And this is for a Kentucky team that before he kind of came around, they'd use more of a committee approach. Asham Rose, Cavassier Smoke, those guys they'd be in the mix and they'd get, that 800 yards or so, but there was always everybody had a role. Everybody had their specialty and they'd rotate. When Chris Rodriguez came around a couple of years ago, 2020, he assumed that lead back role and he never gave it up. It was clearly his. And if you look at him in, 2021 was dynamic. I mean, the whole Liam Cohen was in there for Kentucky. The former Rams assistant went over to Kentucky for 1 year, completely transformed that offense, helped Levis, helped Wan'Dale Robinson, helped Chris Rodriguez really be the best versions of themselves that you kind of didn't see as much in 2022 when Liam Cohen went back to the Rams and Rick Scangarello came in to run the offense from the 49ers. Scangarello's gone. Liam Cohen is back. It's been, musical chairs over there at Kentucky, but last year the line for Kentucky was decimated. Darian Kennard left. A couple of excellent linemen went to the NFL. And you saw that with Will Levis having to stick in and taking some serious shots with blitzers up the middle. He really took some hits, as well as with Rodriguez, because the first 4 games of the year this year, Chris Rodriguez was suspended for, a drunk driving incident or something to that effect. And you saw they couldn't, against 3 non-Power 5 opponents, they could not mount a running game to save their lives. For 4 straight games, this is a Kentucky team that, is winning 8 games in the SEC every year, and they can't mount an offense. As soon as Rodriguez comes back, that entire landscape changed for Kentucky, and they're out there pounding the ball, and they're back to at least being their identity, even if their scheme and, Will Levis's performance he was a little banged up, wasn't carried up to par of what they had put on the previous year. He's powerful. He makes people miss. The big knock on Rodriguez is going to be his high-end speed. He's probably like a 4.65 guy, 4.6, 4.65. It's just how it is. But so was another guy that, as you mentioned from that 2020 class. Also, I had Ramondre Stevenson as a huge player who was a sleeper. He was taken in the 5th round by the Patriots in that same draft as Elijah Mitchell. He was also in that column, and he is more – he was 5'11", 240, and he had feet like Fred Astaire. He was dancing like a ballerina out there when he got that ball in open space. I don't care that he ran a 4.65 because his ability to make people miss in close quarters was phenomenal. And I really think that you see a lot of that with Chris Rodriguez in that he's got a nice slide step, good pacing, reads his blocks. I just feel like he's a sound running back who doesn't have the pop out, make you, blow you away physical traits, in the speed, but he does have conceptually, the feel for the position, the strength, the size in a class that is, frankly, it's 205 or under are a lot of the best guys are 205 and under. There's going to be, I think, a couple guys who are in that 220 range, like we already mentioned, Roschon Johnson, that I think really can emerge like a Tyler Algier last year, a bigger back who came out and really, even though he didn't have, I don't think he was drafted. He may have been at 6th, 7th round, but a very, very late draft capital who goes into a good situation and has the ability to do the between the tackles work that earns him a role at the NFL level.
Not to mention a 1% Fred Astaire reference that the kids certainly will just fast forward through.
What would be the millennial comp for that? Dancing? Is it Dancing with the Stars reference? Or
I was thinking about that. Like, what is
Biebs?
what is the best choreographed dancer? Yeah, Biebs, or I guess J-Lo still does her own dancing.
Well, certainly. Hey, no disrespect to J-Lo or anything. Yeah.
To be fair, also, you and I probably aren't the two people to ask. So
that is fair.
If you know who the millennial dancers are, please send us a tweet.
If you want to talk about wrestling, we're your guys. Not so much,
but
dancing.
not professional dancing.
No.
All information, Froton, as well, I consider to be information. It just comes down to the person parsing that information correctly. So, for instance, and I'm about to ruin this for both of us. I'm so sorry. But for instance, when I see you tweet about a player very high on that player, I then take that information. Some may ask, what do I do with that? I take that information and say, how can I better myself? How can I win money? How can I better my life from this information? And that's to take that information and then like add it to 4th and 5th round dynasty drafts, add that player in the last round of best ball leagues. And so unfortunately for both of us, I need you to talk about Marvin Mims because I snuck him in now into the 17th, 18th round in big board drafts on Underdog. And I know we are about to nuke that possibility because you are about to increase his ADP single-handedly.
Yeah, I have a Marvin Mims fetish. I have to admit, everybody has their thing. Some people like feet. I like Mims. And in fact, it's, you have to remember Marvin Mims, what is the all-time leading high school receiver in the history of America. Maybe there's another country. I know that we've expanded football into many different localities and nations around the world, but in America, he's numero uno. It was Marvin Mims, number one highest all-time season for receiving yardage in the history of high school football. So he comes into Oklahoma, recruited by Lincoln Riley, who's now at USC, and he kind of got hit by the tendency of Riley to want to spread the ball around. Unless you're CeeDee Lamb, the ball is going to be distributed somewhat evenly, over with the Sooners. And unfortunately for Mims, that's what's happened. Because again, he's another guy that is a true breakout, much like Jordan Addison we talked about, true breakout as a freshman, Marvin Mims. But the problem is, he's kind of go a little bit of the outside, a little bit of the slot, they're oscillating him, but he's a deep ball threat. And that's really how he was used. There wasn't a whole route tree that he was used like I would like to see him use. He didn't have, the 120 targets, just the huge dominator rating and the market share that you want to see from, a wide receiver. However, what he did do is he took the top off of defenses and he did it in style. People were expecting him to be in the 4.5 range based on his speed. He went out and ran a 4.38 that blew everybody away. I don't think anyone really saw that coming. It's one of the fastest wide receivers of the combine. And, what backs it up statistically and what you see on tape and what you see from him, and finally he kind of got unleashed this year because Lincoln Riley moved on to USC, and in comes a new regime, and his offensive coordinator, Jeff Lebby, was at Ole Miss last year for the last few years. And so he really used him in a primary role. Even in that role, though, he went from having Caleb Williams as his quarterback, who will be the number one pick next year. It's not particularly debatable. That's happening.
Mini Patrick Mahomes, yes.
Yes, that's happening. He's more mobile. He's more mobile than Mahomes. Different. He's a different sort of a thing because he can run and he can throw on the run too, like extremely well. He's almost got like that Bryce Young ability to feel the pocket, and he's got jets. So he's a 4.5. So I mean, get ready for Caleb Williams. He is the number one quarterback next year. But the point is, he had to go from him to Dillon Gabriel, who 6 foot, maybe a $185, $190, and simply does not have the downfield passing act. Doesn't have the arm of Caleb Williams. That's not knocking Dillon Gabriel. He's UCF quarterback, but that just isn't. That's not realistic to put those two even in the same, planet of talent. So even with Dillon Gabriel, he only got 86 targets because they leaned on their running game a lot between Eric Gray and Javonte Barnes. But even though he only got 86 targets, he still went over 1,000 yards receiving. In fact, of all 1,000-yard receivers in college last year, nobody took less targets to get there than Marvin Mims. 86 targets, the least targets needed of any wide receiver. And that sort of dovetails with when it comes to yards per reception. Marvin Mims was up there among the leaders. I want to say like 18 and a half, just insane. And then additionally, 16.2% of his receptions over the past 2 seasons went for at least 40 yards. That is far and away the most in the entire NCAA over the last 2 season span. The only one who's close is Jalen Hyatt, who is being talked about as a first-round receiver, even though he ran even a more limited route tree than Marvin Mims over there in Tennessee. And when Hyatt was there, in 20 and in 21, in 2021, he barely saw the ball. He had 250 yards receiving each of those first 2 years. because Cedric Tillman was healthy in 2021, and he was the alpha dominant receiver, unquestioned in that room, and he demanded all the targets because he went out there against Georgia, which is the most generationally best defense I've seen in the last 20 years, was that complete Georgia defense. Florida State had a great one their year too, but that Georgia defense, he went out and lit them on fire in 2021. Cedric Tillman had over 150 yards receiving, had like 10 catches, and he went and took turns between Darian Kendrick and Kelly Ringo of who's getting it next. Oh, you want it next, Darian? You're getting it. So when Cedric Tillman, who is my wide receiver 6, I have him ahead of Jalen Hyatt, because you're not going to sit there and put him. You're not going to tell me Jalen Hyatt is a better receiver than Cedric Tillman. My eyes watched it. Okay, you're not going to tell me that. He's not. He's ahead of Jalen Hyatt. I don't care how fast he ran, and he didn't run fast enough. He ran 4.41 Hyatt. So with Tillman going, and being injured in 2022, well, there comes Hyatt. Now Hyatt has this big year where he has 1,200 yards receiving. He gets the Biletnikoff. He only got 89 targets, in order to get that. That's the thing. Hyatt and Mims are the two guys in this class that are right there with each other for me. They're very, very similar in terms of skill set. And everybody thought Hyatt was this rocket ship, and Mims is faster. He ran a 4.38 as opposed to a 4.41. So value-wise, where I'm seeing Jalen Hyatt go in, the end of the first round, like right at the very top of the second, and then I see Mims going in round 3, like early third, mid 3. Look, I have Mims rated ahead of Jalen Hyatt. I have Tillman rated ahead of Jalen Hyatt. I think they're going to be better receivers because you don't see any sort of intermediate routes at all, any sort of feel, any sort of ability after the catch. And with Mims, you go watch his highlight tape. There's one on YouTube. Obviously I watch all the games. You go on YouTube and you see like an 8-minute highlight tape of Mims, and you watch the degree of difficulty of some of these catches he's making downfield at 5'11", and it's like Jahan Dotson last year, where even though he's 5'11", Jahan Dotson has that supernatural ability to ball track and just manipulate his defender at the top of the stem to know how to make those downfield catches. And Mims just has that talent. Some guys can just do it, and he's doing it in contested situation where he's winning at the catch point. I just think based on all that stuff, based on the fact that he was always the number one wide receiver in his room, there's never anybody better than Mims. He just wasn't used that way until this year. I am all in on Marvin Mims. I think he's worth a mid-second, maybe even early in that range pick. And it's simply way, way, way too high that he's going if he's going down in the third round. He's a second-round receiver in all rookie drafts and should be treated as such.
You didn't mean to, but because you're so good at what you do, you just killed 2 birds with 1 stone. And one, nuking, as I already discussed, Mims' ADP. No longer will he be a value to both of us, but also having the hot but educated take in Cedric Tillman being the better volunteer receiver to Jalen Hyatt. Because right now, I don't know if you know, but on the big board on Underdog, Jalen Hyatt is being drafted mid to late 8th round. 106 overall ADP is the wide receiver 50, whereas Tillman currently undrafted. Literally, and get him in the last round. And remember, this is a player that I think both of us think will probably go on day 2, right? Round 2, round 3.
Yeah, that's a big Mutombo. You're getting the Mutombo for that one, guys.
Right.
Do not go near Jalen Hyatt in the 8th round. Good Lord.
When Tillman is
that's a no, especially if it's this year, especially you're redrafting. He isn't polished enough to go and step into an NFL room and go out and be worthy of an 8th round pick in the first. It's not happening. I don't care where his landing spot is. He's a one-trick pony right now. Maybe in a couple years, and they talk about this. I mean, obviously, we all know this, where, the commonly parsed refrain of it takes 3 years for a wide receiver to really get his feet wet in the NFL and really get his bearings. And it's been a quicker curve nowadays because the passing game in college is so emphasized. You see Waddle, Smith, Chase right out of the gate, Wilson, Olave, the really strong receivers, the rock solid ones, they produce right away. That's not what you're getting here out of Hyatt. Hyatt doesn't have that polish of a Wilson, of an Olave. Even Drake London, I like. Obviously, we talked about him a little bit in comparison to Quentin Johnston. You can do more than Quentin Johnston. All those guys are right out of the gate, ready to go. I just don't see that out of Hyatt. And in fact, as discussed, he wasn't even the alpha in his own room, and Cedric Tillman's just better than him. The fact that he's going undrafted and highest going in the 8th round, that is unacceptable.
Another receiver that I think was overshadowed, but a winner from the combine, is Bryce Ford-Wheaton. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on him because Anthony Richardson's athleticism obviously stole the show. But Ford-Wheaton, West Virginia's receiver, quietly came in with the best RAS, the highest athleticism score among wide receivers among this class. Not only that, but 11th, the 11th highest RAS all time among wide receivers at the combine since PFR's database goes back to 2000. So is there any chance here as Ford-Wheaton emerging as a late round dynasty selection we should keep our eyes on?
Oh, hell yeah.
Let's hear it.
Of course. Why not? All right, so with Bryce Ford-Wheaton, West Virginia wide receiver, as discussed. I mean, he's like 6'3", 225, 6'4", 225. And for the basically last year, I joined a Campus to Canton. I try to do a new Campus to Canton league every year. I did one 2 years ago, I did one this year. And in the league this year, we drafted 50 rounds. Okay. In the 44th round of a Campus to Canton league that was drafted in the summer last year. So even call it 9 months ago. I want to say we started in June, roughly. So 9 months ago, this was drafted. This isn't even a full year. Bryce Ford-Wheaton, I selected him personally in the program C2C in the 44th round of that draft of 12 teams.
Wow.
So it ended up being like in the 500s is where he was selected last year. This isn't 3 years ago. This is the last year before the season. Mm-hmm. That goes to show you by saying quietly crept up. That's how quietly he crept up, that he was a 44th round selection preseason. Now, the first 6 weeks of the year, Ford-Wheaton was dominating out there for West Virginia. Had JT Daniels, who was a former USC top 10 quarterback, was a former starter at USC, went to Georgia, got beat out by Stetson Bennett, went to West Virginia, he got beat out again, and now he's at Rice. Literally 4 teams for Mr. JT Daniels. I think that has to be a record of some sort, but he was throwing the ball and, looking pretty good over the course of the first 4 or 5 games, relative to competition. But then Daniels got banged up and, the quarterback play wasn't particularly great at West Virginia. And I think that Wheaton he got dinged up too as well. I forget what the injury was, but he ended up missing a game or so. And when he came back, he just wasn't the same. Like West Virginia as a team, they fired their offensive coordinator, Graham Harrell, after the season because nobody was happy with what they were getting out of the program. So that's something you have to remember with these college guys is there's some, just because they're coming from college doesn't mean that everything was sunshine and rainbows at their particular program. And it was certainly not last year at West Virginia. That was a team that was in transition. Neil Brown, their head coach, is firmly placed on the hot seat, had to jettison pretty much the entire offensive staff because of how poorly they were last year in terms of moving the ball. So as the quarterback play sort of leveled off and degraded as the season went on, they were forced to throw the ball shorter more and more to Caden Prather, who is now on Maryland, was on West Virginia last year, and had one of the lowest ADOTs, one of the 5 lowest average depth of targets in all of college football last year with Prather. And the reason why is because they couldn't complete passes downfield. They didn't have the quarterback play to do it. So they had to kind of go with those shorter underneath routes. And that wasn't what Bryce Ford-Wheaton did. If you see his tape, obviously you get him on one-on-ones on the sideline, and that's a real matchup problem. But the overall level of play around him wasn't very good. That gets to me seeing him at the Shrine Bowl. I was at the Shrine Bowl for 5 days. Mm-hmm. Saw a lot of Bryce Ford-Wheaton. Where he excels is being able to manipulate. He's physical when it comes to asserting himself. What he didn't do well is his releases. Okay, and this is something it's ironic because I actually ended up talking to him about this at the combine. Actually, at the Shrine Bowl. So he told me this at the Shrine Bowl when we discussed, he had never faced a jam in all of college. He had never, not once, had to deal with a release. He'd been getting free releases to do what he wants downfield. No problem. It was the first time he ever faced a jam was when he was doing those one-on-ones, or, at least in a game situation, he was doing those one-on-ones at the Shrine Bowl. And he specifically talked about how he had a little bit of trouble with the faster corners, specifically talked about Eric Scott, who was a cornerback for Southern Miss. He was not, I don't think he was at the Combine and he didn't get an invite, but at the Shrine Bowl, a smaller corner, but he was just in pocket and in phase because he was quick and he was feisty at that, right up there. He was getting right up on him and he was fast enough to be able to jam him, kind of give him a problem and then stay with him downfield. So if there's anything that I'm looking at with Ford-Wheaton, that's obviously number one is what's his release package going to look like when he gets to the next level. So he is physically, it's literally Megatron-esque proportions. Megatron's the freakiest wide receiver. In fact, he's the number one freakiest player in the history of the relative athletic score, the RAS, number one. And he's like, Bryce Ford-Wheaton is 11th. It's so hard. Like, trust me, Bryce Ford-Wheaton is a freak standing next to this guy. And you're looking at him, and I've done it. And he's a specimen. What is he going to look like at the next level when he's against these 6'1", 200-pound corners that can run with him like Eric Scott ran with him and can deal with the jam? Can he stack those guys where he's showing the 4.38 speed? He ran the same thing as Mims did at 225. It's unreal. Can he stack those guys? Does he have the polish to be able to leverage that athleticism? I do think that's a question. I do think you're probably not going to see year one him coming out and being ready to go, since he will need to develop. But when he gets in that NFL wide receivers room, he works with those NFL level coaches, the Keenan McCardles of the world that he was working with at the Shrine Bowl. I can't wait to see what he does, because he is truly a ball of clay. You got to, again, as you mentioned, John, I've been watching on these. I haven't seen a lot of Bryce Ford-Wheaton going, even after the Combine. Did people figure out that this guy has the ability from a dynasty perspective to be a very valuable player down the road? And I think he's a top 100 pick. I think he's probably a third rounder now, end third supplemental pick. Those guys need to be taken advantage of, and you will see him going in the third round, at least in the upcoming drafts after draft capital has been allocated, because he's going in the top 100 picks. So if you're doing your drafts now, start looking at Bryce Ford-Wheaton as a third round pick. That's where he's going to be.
It's very much like the Full Swing Golf documentary when Joel Damon said, someone's got to be the number 70 golfer in the world. Anthony Richardson being the most athletic quarterback ever at the Combine definitely overshadowed the receiver being the 11th most athletic receiver ever. That's why he got lost in the shuffle there.
Understood. Fair.
But finally, before we get out of here, like with the running back class, we need to tap into a late round guy at wide receiver that we can grab because you think he will have draft capital in April. So what is a receivers that stood out to you?
All right. So guys down the board again, because if we're going sleepers, we're going to go sleepers.
Yeah.
Somebody who, again, maybe sliding in the fifth round, but most of the time he's going undrafted in rookie drafts. Jacob Copeland, wide receiver, formerly of Florida. Last year he went to Maryland and was in a very talented Maryland wide receiver room, which Dante Demas is another guy. He ran in the 4.5s. He will be probably a 5th, 6th rounder. As is Raheem Jarrett, who was the highest rated recruit that the Maryland Terrapins landed since Stephon Diggs. So yeah, that's what a big deal that Raheem Jarrett was going there, with Mike Loxley. So comes from a very talented wide receiver room. As we saw with Maryland, we saw Deonte Banks and Jacorian Bennett. Those guys tested real well. All the Terps tested well. This is not like the Rutgers era Maryland. They got athletes. They got guys who can play now. So that's something you really want to be aware of, for next year, where they got 3 wide receivers who could be drafted. The one I'm going to talk about, Jacob Copeland, transferred this year from Florida. And he's like another Shrine Bowl guy, 5'11", 210 pounds. That's like A.J. Brown proportions we're talking about here as a wide receiver. Ran a 4.41. So I'm seeing, he's barely getting drafted. I'm seeing a guy like Parker Washington for Penn State. We're on like a 4.55, 4.57, type guy. He's just, you don't see much separation on the breaks. He's more like a dependable dump off type guy who can work zone out of the slot. I don't see, like, they're both similarly sized. He's running a 4.41. And with Copeland, you saw him at the Shrine game, very shifty. He isn't just all speed. The fact that he can cut and, be able to win off the break specifically at 210, 215 is where he's weighing in at. That is not something that you just see every day. And those are the type of guys, and especially like just having seen the way he works, I think if we're looking for somebody in the 5th, 6th, 7th round who could have an Amon-Ra St. Brown type impact, that's a guy that I look at is Jacob Copeland, about the way that he moves, size, BMI type, talent. The fact that he was able to go into an established wide receiver room and show that he belongs, not only to belong, but he earned, a breadth, a good portion of those targets. I thought he outplayed Raheem Jarrett, who is being, mocked in the 3rd round or so. He's being, he's certainly way ahead of Jacob Copeland. I have Copeland ahead of Raheem Jarrett, like comfortably. And I just think that that's a guy that people are missing because he wasn't at the Senior Bowl. He's at the Shrine Bowl. But he lit everybody up at the Shrine Bowl. Stood out. It was obvious that this kid can play. And then he goes and he runs the way he did at the Combine. He needs to be going in the 5th rounds. Is he, he's not going to be a top 5 wide receiver taken here or anything. He does still have a lot to prove. But if we're talking about down the board, we're talking about sleepers, I loved what I saw out of Jacob Copeland on every facet of it, the way he played and the way he tested. That's what I'm looking for a sleeper.
I'm so happy you mentioned the Senior and Shrine Bowl as well, because yes, the Combine gets all the news, but as you and I know for doing this for so long, the NFL draft begins at the Shrine and Senior Bowls because that's when scouts show up, and whoever wins in those games, and it's usually limited players, but those who win, like a Mac Jones, for instance, that's how they become on the top of your boards from the moment those begin. Froton, tell everyone where they can find you and everything we talked about today.
Well, thank you. You can reach me at CF Froton on the Twitter machine. I'm also at NBC Sports, where I will be doing plenty of content creation, I'm sure, over the next couple of months leading into the draft. And then thereafter, I will be diving headlong into my team projections once the over-unders come out for college. I am a college football guy, first and foremost. I let John, my colleague, Mr. Daigle, handle all the NFL stuff. But when it comes to doing the college football, I watch every day, every Saturday, watch every game I possibly can, wall to wall. I do at least 20 games each week, thereafter, in order to make sure that I watch as many players as I possibly can in season. And as John mentioned at the top, I am the #1 college football player props analyst in the entire world. I don't know of anybody else who's been doing that as long as I have, as well as this will be my 23rd year doing college fantasy football. I don't know anyone else who's been doing it longer than me for that respect. So if you have any interest in college fantasy football, you should be playing it. It is I enjoy it more than I enjoy pro fantasy football, since we have 133 teams, and all day, every Saturday, wall to wall. There's no 1 o'clock games, no 4 o'clock games, no 8 o'clock games. There's just games, and they just come game after game after game. If you want the best possible fantasy experience related to football, it's not the XFL, it's not the USFL, it's not even the NFL. No offense, John Daigle. It is college fantasy football.
And we will open that wrestling channel in the 4-4 Discord to get you in there.
Yes, absolutely.
Sometimes soon. We will be back next week with multiple free agency episodes on this podcast. Also, stay tuned to 44.com, where Paulson just released live on the site right now his free agency preview and my free agency tracker with fantasy blurbs already up for those who have been slapped with the franchise tag on the site, free for everyone. Until then, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you next time.